From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Hello and welcome to U.S. Farm Report. I'm Clinton Griffiths in for Tyne Morgan. Here's what we're working on for you. Celebrating 50 years of Sioux.
So it was a big undertaking, it really was.
How this giant statue found a home in North Dakota. Perspective from the front lines.
Your grandson's going to see a different world based on the outcome of this war.
Howard G. Buffett shares his view of the war in Ukraine with farmers in Pennsylvania. In the battle for climate-smart agriculture, we take a tour in Oklahoma.
So that's the reason we're here, is to see what practices people are putting on the ground.
And USDA rolls out its final acreage numbers as farmers in the Northwest Corn Belt battle massive flooding and rain. Today on U.S. Farm Report.
U.S. Farm Report, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when experience meets expertise. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Now for the news that moved the markets this week. And we began with USDA's latest acreage numbers and grain stocks report. It's estimating corn acres to come in at 91.5 million. That's down 3% from last year, but higher than its prospective plantings report from March. For soybeans, USDA forecasting 86.1 million acres, up 3% from a year ago. Wheat in at 47.2 million acres, down 5%. Also released the quarterly grain stocks report. It shows just under 5 billion bushels of corn, up 22% from this time last year. Soybeans, 970 million bushels, also up 22%, while wheat in at 702 million bushels, up 23%. We'll dive more into the numbers coming up in this week's roundtables with guest host Michelle Rook. But already those numbers may have to be revised following massive flooding in the Northwest Corn Belt. It follows heavy rains in Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. The issues causing the Chicago Board of Trade and the CME Group to issue force majeure notices. The legal clause allows parties to suspend or terminate their contractual obligations when events beyond their control happen, and that can include natural disasters. Right now, the notice is for corn shipping stations along the Illinois River. Experts say it could lead to shortages of finished products and delays in shipments, both locally and nationally. But the issues go beyond that. It's reported flooding has inundated fields, potentially leading to significant crop losses. And there's concern about other rivers in the area.
We've seen a real dramatic increase in water levels on the Missouri River. Very notable. Last week at this time, there was only a 3-foot difference in water levels between this date in 2024 versus the same date in 2023. And now looking at today, there is a 20-foot differential in water levels between this year and last year. So it just really shows how much these water levels can escalate. And so clearly that has an impact on rivers and the ability to have barge transportation.
The flooding has also damaged critical infrastructure, including bridges and rail lines, further complicating transportation. USDA says 4 states are launching a voluntary pilot program to test bulk milk tanks on dairy farms for avian flu. The states are Kansas, Nebraska, New Mexico, and Texas. According to the agency, farmers who voluntarily enter the program will be able to move their herds across state lines without additional testing. That's after bulk milk tanks or similar representative samples tested negative for H5N1 for 3 consecutive weeks. The Food and Drug Administration is also announcing it will expand its H5N1 testing to include additional dairy products such as aged raw milk cheese, cream cheese, butter, and ice cream. The FDA has assured the public the nation's milk supply remains safe. Higher cash prices boosted cattle feeding margins to an average of just under $500 per head last week. Now, according to the Sterling Profit Tracker, that's $100 over the previous week. Cash cattle averaged over $196 per hundredweight for the week ending June 22nd. And cattle sold last week carried a total feed cost of more than $359 per head. That's down about $227 below the feed cost for cattle sold the same week a year ago. Planning a 4th of July cookout, while the American Farm Bureau Federation says costs are at a record high. Its market basket survey finding an Independence Day cookout will cost $71.22 for 10 guests this year. That includes things like cheeseburgers, chicken breasts, pork chops, homemade potato salad, strawberries, and ice cream. That's up 5% from 2023 and almost 30% higher than just 5 years ago. At more than $7 per person, the cost represents a record high since the organization began the survey back in 2013. U.S. Ambassador Ken Salazar is now praising Mexico's effort to protect American ag avocado inspectors in Michoacan. It comes a week after the U.S. suspended inspections following an attack on 2 inspectors there. Salazar traveling to the state, which has been plagued by violence linked to organized crime. He says Michoacan authorities have agreed to a security plan to restart avocado exports. Still ahead, has the rain-making machine finally turned off over the northern plains and Midwest? We'll have an update next in weather.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
And more dramatic scenes from the flood-ravaged Midwest and a dam close to collapse in Minnesota. Watch as a home falls into the water. The good news here, the family that lived there had been evacuated, so no one was injured. The ground under the house undermined by water from the Blue Earth River, rushing around the 114-year-old dam. The home serving as a store and was famous for its pies. Meteorologist Matt Engelbrecht joins us now. And Matt, those areas such as northwestern Iowa and southern Minnesota, they really don't need any more rain for now.
Hope you're having a good weekend. Here's a look at the latest Drought Monitor. It's looking better, not great, but looking better in and across parts of the Midwest, into Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. Now we are under a moderate drought in some locations, dry to moderate drought, but things are looking better in those locations into the Midwest. And we should get some help. We have had some help this past weekend in a few of those locations. Different story into Texas and New Mexico. That's where we're starting to get a little bit deeper into this legend. A severe, extreme, if not exceptional, back into parts of Big Bend, Texas, also into New Mexico as well. So where's the relief going to come into play? Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Texas is going to get much in the way of rainfall, and there's 2 reasons for that. We got a weak low pressure system that is coming through this weekend and a cold front that is attached to it. Between the two, typically, if that trough, if that digging jet stream was able to get down here towards the south, it would spread the rain down to the south, right along that cold front. But the front and the energy from the jet stream is going to be pretty shallow back up here into parts of central and northern parts of the United States. So that's why you start to see more of the yellows and the oranges, Tennessee northward, rather than that rain extending deep down here to the south. The third part of this, because we did the cold front, we did the low, the third part of this, that ridge of high pressure that we're going to be talking all about next week, is one of the reasons why that energy is so shallow and why that cold front doesn't make it that far south. Now, where that cold front lays yesterday, today, and the rest of the week is going to be very important for rain chances right along it going into the 4th of July holiday. So let's go look at the jet stream. When I say ridge of high pressure, this is what I'm talking about. So very tough to move a heavy, hot air mass. So that's why that trough, that piece of energy that I was talking about, isn't able to get all the way down to Texas, isn't able to get all the way down to the southeast. We continue to have some scorching temperatures Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. Any kind of relief is going to be bottled back up here into the Dakotas and Montana on Tuesday, and then work to the east, not to the south, work to the east for a more zonal flow across the United States-Canadian border into Wednesday and Thursday. Thursday, of course, being 4th of July. The other part of this equation, what's going on the West Coast, very hot temperatures off the coast of California and also over California next week.
All right, we'll dig into the latest acreage numbers from USDA and how they may or may not impact our markets in the weeks ahead. Michelle Rook joins us next.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. This weekend, we're focusing on these big USDA reports with Deere and Fry and Matt Bennett. And let's start off with corn acres coming in at 91.5 million acres, guys, up almost 1.5 million acres from the March report. First of all, Darren, where did those acres come from?
That's a great question. I guess as we were talking before we got on here, Matt and you and I, that maybe just people were so discouraged with the base price being low, and at the end of March, they just weren't real optimistic. And so maybe the survey was just low from an extraordinary standpoint. And I don't think farmers, as the season went on and it got rainier and it had more trouble getting their crop in those certain areas, like up towards the Northwest, they planted more, or because they thought there was more profitability, they planted more, or they had an easier time. Corn was going in so well, so they kept going. I don't think it was any of that. I think this is just a reaction to maybe a low ball number in March.
Yeah, and I know, Matt, you agree with that. You thought the number was too low to start with. I guess the next question is, we did have flooded acres now here that came after the surveys were taken in the Northwestern Corn Belt. Does that mean this number will go down? And if it does, when would it even show up?
I mean, it's highly unlikely you'll see the planted acreage number go down. I suppose by the end of the year, you're going to see it reflected. Mostly, you're probably going to see it reflected in would be in harvested acres and or yield. And so the report for me and for our team wasn't a shock on acreage. Actually, I believe we were the highest estimate at 91.3. We felt all along like those March numbers, were artificially low. I mean, we just felt like the grower had seen the lowest prices they'd seen in about 3 years. And so, I think that sentiment was so low that most producers weren't overly optimistic about exactly what they were going to do as far as planning was concerned, especially with really high input costs still. But I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, because we also predicted that bean acres would be higher, and we missed that one just a little bit.
Yeah, Matt, how much does this add then to production, these extra acres of corn?
Yeah, and so whenever you start talking about, for instance, the 91.5, if you go ahead with, a typical harvested percentage of, let's say, around 91%, if you get a 181, you're starting to talk about a 2.5 billion bushel carry again with pretty strong demand. USDA's forecasted fairly strong demand. That's what we're using in our balance sheet. If you go to like a 178 type range, you're still looking at a 2.3. So you certainly are going to have plenty of corn on hand planting this type of acreage without some sort of major weather event. Clearly we're a couple weeks away from, I think, people feeling a little bit better. If you get through pollination with no major issues in the bulk of the Corn Belt, I think that you're going to start talking about some awfully big carryout numbers.
Soybean number came in on acreage 86.1 million acres, down a little over 400,000 from March. Darren, did those go straight, or did those come straight from corn or go straight to corn? Or do you think, this pulls the balance sheet down that much now?
Well, I think corn probably got some of those acres. That's probably what makes the most sense. I know cotton acres were up a whole bunch too. So maybe we had a few less beans planted down in the Mid-South Delta region, because we know cotton was up over 1 million acres. So that could have been part of it. I mean, we have a pretty decent carry out on the balance sheet now, and moving into new crop, I don't see us being real tight there, even with this reduction in acres. Got to remember that China so far hasn't booked really anything for new crop, and maybe they're going to. Maybe it's going to be just in time inventory, but they don't have any forward bookings on. So I still think that balance sheet is going to be where the problems are. I'm more bullish corn just because demand has been better. But obviously, like Matt said, 2.3, 2.5 isn't going to be a bullish scenario unless we reduce this crop significantly.
Absolutely. Well, we got some bearish numbers in the quarterly stocks report as well. We'll talk about that after the break. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. We continue to digest these USDA reports with Darren Fry and Matt Bennett. And let's talk about quarterly stocks. First of all, on the corn, we came in almost 890 million bushels above last year. And I guess, Matt, do you think that number seems accurate with what we've seen with these strong cash basis levels in the country?
I mean, it's interesting to say the least. Average trade guess actually was 100 million bushel below where USDA came in. And as you suggested, there's a lot of places, especially in the West, that you're seeing awfully strong basis levels. Right here in the heart of central Illinois, we've had a very large processor push from 5 over to 25 over in a matter of days here over the last couple of weeks. And it's just evidenced, I think, of a grower who's fairly tight-fisted. I'm not so sure that the corn's not there. I just think the growers had a really hard time coming to grips with such a drastically lower price than what we've become accustomed to over the last couple of years. So this stocks number did surprise me somewhat. I didn't think that we had quite as much on hand as what the USDA suggested, but again, that's a big task trying to get a handle on how much corn is out there. And right now, it sure looks like we've got plenty.
Yeah, no doubt. Soybeans, quarterly stocks there, Darren, we're up 174 million bushels over last year. Does that seem maybe fair considering the slow export demand that we've seen?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. We were only up a little bit above where the trade estimates were, about 8 million bushels. And I do think that, just like Matt said with the corn and the strong basis, I think the spreads, especially inverted July over Nove and July over August, August over Nove, kind of leaves you a little bit baffled because we know that at the river terminal in St. Louis, they've been pushing the basis. Obviously, the spreads are inverted. The commercials are standing on those spreads. And you would think they were maybe going to have a smaller number, but we didn't get that either. So kind of throw your arms up. You never know what the government's going to come with.
Yeah. So the strong cash basis levels are more reflective, you think, of crush demand on beans?
Well, or just the fact that maybe the crop was a little bit larger last year than what the USDA stated, because I think we're using about what we expect. We know what crush is, on a monthly basis, and we know what exports are, and yet we're ending up with a little bit more inventory than what we expected, and especially given the inverted spreads.
Let's also talk about wheat. Quarterly stocks were actually up over last year, but acres were down from last year and from March. So what do you think, Matt? Was it kind of a wash or?
Yeah, I mean, the trade doesn't seem to think it was a wash. I mean, you've got wheat lower, but I mean, other than yesterday or Thursday, the wheat market has pretty much taken a beating here lately. Overall, I mean, basically we've gone down almost a couple of dollars here over the last month whenever you look at July Chicago wheat. So it's been a pretty rough go. Yes, stocks were higher. Acreage a little bit lower than expected. I was kind of surprised by that, quite frankly. But regardless, yes, I would say it was a fairly neutral report. Whenever you see corn trading 19 cents lower, seeing wheat trade 10 or 12 cents lower, does make a little more sense. Wheat's going to follow corn around a little bit more than soybeans. Let's be real about it. This isn't so much a wheat report as it is a corn and bean report, because this is one of the biggest ones of the year, of course, seeing planted acreage.
Yeah. And Darren, do you think maybe this is the kind of report, though, that can bottom the market? Can we turn from here? Do you think we were so bearish coming in?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, the funds are holding a big short position across the board, and I think they've added to it the last few days. We'll get new COT numbers, but it doesn't include everything that was done during the week. And so I think they do have a short position they'll want to cover at some point.
Thanks so much, Darren and Matt. We'll have more U.S. Farm Report coming up. Tractor Tales is next.
Hey, welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're going to head to North Dakota to check out a very special story on a young farmer's first tractor purchase.
Daniel Jocelyn grew up in west central Minnesota. Farming was always an important part of his life.
I was always out in the tractor with Dad, and asking Mom to go out in the field and riding around and up here at the shop whenever I could be. I grew up, that's what I wanted to do.
Daniel saw that his older brother Andrew was interested in farming as well. In fact, he'd begun baling hay to earn some money. The first year he had his own baler, he used his father's 970 case to run it.
So I bought a baler with him when I was 14, and we started baling more, and I started to rent some land from my grandma to raise some wheat and soybeans. From there, it just kind of took off and started baling more, and bought my brother out from the baling business and started raising hay.
Just a couple years later, Daniel had saved cash to make his first tractor purchase possible.
There was a 2294, the one sitting behind me, on an auction sale 2 miles from home, and I was interested in it, and I didn't have the money to buy it, and my dad said, well, go to the bank and see what you can do. So I went to the bank after school, and I talked to my loan officer at the bank there and told him my plans, and my dad came in and co-signed on the loan for me, and went to the auction sale and bought it, and drove it from the sale to the bank, signed papers on it.
Like many farmers, Daniel's first tractor holds a special place in his heart. So much so that his parents had a special gift for him at his high school graduation.
My parents had a toy maker in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, custom make a 2294 case tractor just like mine with the duals on it.
Daniel says that in high school he would spend most afternoons and evenings after school working on his tractors and balers, taking care of the maintenance needed to be ready for farm season. At the age of 15, it's clear that Daniel has a passion for hard work and his 2294 case tractor.
Still ahead, flipping the script when it comes to carbon emissions and cattle. How ranchers are leading the way when it comes to sustainability in this week's Farm Journal Report.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Cattle producers in Oklahoma are trying to rebuild after years of drought cut into the size of the herd. However, as Michelle Rook reports, those producers who climate-proofed their operation in advance fared the best. Ranchers got to see that firsthand as part of the Trust in Beef Sustainable Ranchers Tour near Stillwater.
Sustainability practices are helping U.S. cattle producers to climate-proof their operations, but it's also a priority throughout the U.S. beef supply chain, from gate to plate. Mother Nature continues to present the biggest challenge for Oklahoma ranchers, but they learn from each other the best ways to climate-proof their land as part of the Trust in Beef Sustainable Ranchers Tour.
Weather's always a factor. But you know, when you really apply good conservation practices on the ground, you can start helping mitigate that some. And so that's the reason we're here, is to see what practices people are putting on the ground.
That includes the grazing management Bertram cattle use to help them avoid culling the herd after 3 years of historic drought.
By rotationally grazing or letting these pasture areas rest, we've just done better to regenerate the land and help those pastures rest, and really have done our cow herd by maintaining those body condition scores and not having to use a lot of feed.
They rotate cattle. A lot of the old fences.
Producers attending the tour saw how Bertrams rotate cattle every 2 weeks using conventional fencing and a new technology, virtual fencing. A transmitter around the cow's neck emits a warning sound to keep her in the correct grazing area, and it aids in monitoring animal health.
Rotating cattle without a permanent fence, just like our dog's in the yard and he can't go beyond that boundary. We're trying that same concept with cattle. Where is that fence boundary? Can we move cattle with the click of a mouse on the computer? Where are they at? Is that cow having a calving problem?
Beyond that, Bertrams attribute much of their success to data analysis. Clay's father, Mike, started Farm Data Services 43 years ago, a management accounting firm.
And we're looking at return per acre, return per animal unit. We're looking at their crops. We're looking at the crop insurance programs. Crops are going to plant. We analyze that. We look at the government programs. We look at how does LRP and marketing work. It is a complete approach to that.
That data helps them make the changes they need in the operation to stay viable long term.
Sustainability is great, but the first leg of sustainability's got to be bottom line profits. Without profits, there is no sustainability.
Data is really foundational in being able to describe your ecosystem and your environment, your production outcomes and things of that nature. That way you can use that to make better decisions down the road.
Trust in Beef partners also participated in the tour and shared how they're working with producers to lower their carbon footprint.
Being able to connect the data all the way back from the rail all the way back to the farm of origin and share the data on animal performance, and ultimately the impact of practices on their carbon intensity is where we're planning to go over time.
Genetics and sustainability play a key role together. For any operation to be sustainable, they have to be profitable, and that's where genetics come into play.
The more efficiently we can grow and raise an animal, the more sustainable we are, not just from a profitability standpoint, but even from an environmental standpoint.
Animal handling and welfare is another pillar of sustainability, and the tour provided a chance for participants to get BQA certified.
Beef Quality Assurance is a program that really addresses the piece around the animals, and it also touches the people and the environment, because we do cover you know, how to take good care of the animals in the context of the environment they're in.
Retailers like Lopez Dorado, one of McDonald's main suppliers, also shared how ranchers fit into their sustainability goals.
We're going to have to start supplying the same amount of food and raising the same amount of animals, but with less resources. I mean, clearly the drought is one indication of how it is getting harder and harder to produce the same amount of product every year. So engagement like this, engagement with industry is so important.
Oklahoma Secretary of Ag Blaine Arthur says producers have been using climate smart ag for years, and it's critical for the state's future.
For producers, as we know that we're going to have to produce more with less, and so that's what we've got to look at, the natural resources that we've got available to us. How are we taking care of those, and then how can we better utilize those?
And this paradigm shift benefits both producers and consumers.
And all those regenerative practices do play into the overall best quality product, best for the environment, and the whole world does benefit from well-managed lands.
Which will help sustain the entire U.S. beef chain for the future. I'm Michelle Rook for U.S. Farm Report.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Well, coming up, continuing to call attention to the plight of farmers in Ukraine. See what one well-known philanthropist and fellow farmer is doing to raise awareness. Next. Once an ag export powerhouse, farmers in Ukraine continue to struggle as the war with Russia rages around them. Now take a look at this graphic from USDA. It shows production of the major commodities in Ukraine and projects that out through 2034. As you can see, corn, wheat, sunflower seed, sunflower oil, and barley production have all fallen significantly and are expected to remain lower to flat for the next decade. Illinois farmer and philanthropist Howard G. Buffett has been to the front lines of Ukraine a dozen times. He continues to share his experience with farmers and the rural communities with producers here at home as part of his Whistle Stops for Ukraine tour. The stakes remain high as the battle between Russia and Ukraine continues. While here at home,
I'm going back for my 12th trip here in a few weeks.
Howard G. Buffett and the German Marshall Fund continue their Whistle Stops for Ukraine tour this month in Waterford, Pennsylvania, just outside of Erie.
The amount of times that Howard had been to Ukraine personally and some of the experiences that he had had there really do help characterize what's going on.
During a discussion at Troyer Farms, Buffett shared his experience from the roughly 40 days spent on the front lines.
I can't tell you how many farms I've been on in Ukraine where every piece of equipment is destroyed.
His foundation is now on track to spend some $800 million in Ukraine by the end of the year. Money spent on food and machinery as farmers deal with 85,000 pieces of equipment destroyed, grain stolen, and fields bombed or littered with landmines.
The number of acres, the level of damage, and then characterizing the type of damage that farmland's gone through and the amount of equipment that's been destroyed, and then trying to figure out how you would farm around that yourself was pretty powerful.
You know, there's a lot of misunderstandings about agriculture in Ukraine today and what's happening, so we're here to see if we can answer questions and see how farmers feel about it.
For fourth-generation potato farmer Mark Troyer, the conversation was eye-opening.
We sit there and can say, oh, we've got labor issues, we've got weather issues. I mean, one thing, we sure don't have landmines to deal with, and so when you throw that in the mix and to have maybe people roaming the countryside that want to kill you, it sure makes it a little bit eye-opening on how good we have it here.
While Pennsylvania grape grower Nick Mobilia agrees.
I think this is the first time we really heard a lot of the truth about what is going on over there and what the consequences are going to be if we as a civilized society and all the other nations don't get together to lend a hand and put an end to this.
For his part, Buffett is now working on ways to help demine an area roughly the size of Colorado, including experimenting with equipment running over explosives to see how it can be hardened against the blast.
But blowing the stuff up is to understand if we hit something, even though we think we're going to avoid it, if we do hit something, what parts do we have to have? You know, what's it going to take to fix it?
While he's working in Ukraine, these farmers are asking what they can do from Pennsylvania.
I think when I get home, I'm going to call Congressman Kelly up, and we're going to have a little talk and let him know what I just found out and what we as the Farm Bureau can do to help him in his job to make sure that our country is doing what we should be doing.
As the debate at home continues, Buffett says he remains focused on the future of farming in Ukraine.
I can tell you, if it doesn't affect someone, they don't care about it. I can guarantee you that. But so our job is to explain why this is affecting and will really affect you in the future.
It's very easy for all of us to kind of get tied up in our own little world here, and I mean, it's planting season, and you know, we sit there and focus on planting our crop and trying to get it in the ground.
And from his view from the front line, Buffett believes the ripples of this conflict are likely to be felt for generations to come.
Yeah, your grandson's going to see a different world based on the outcome of this war.
You can read more about the Whistle Stops for Ukraine tour in the latest issue of Farm Journal magazine and at the website on your screen, gmfus.org/whistlestops. Up next, turning the focus closer to home and just around the corner. The Iowa Utilities Board has approved the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline. Now, the pipeline, which would be the largest of its kind, would transport liquefied carbon dioxide from ethanol plants in Iowa and neighboring states to North Dakota, spanning over 2,000 miles. 75% of the Iowa route landowners have already signed voluntary easement agreements. Critics argue the pipeline benefits corporations at the expense of rural communities and poses safety risks without significantly reducing climate pollution. The approval is contingent on securing necessary permits in South Dakota and North Dakota. Now let's bring in AgriTalk's Chip Flory for today's Chip's Corner. And Chip, now you talked with the CEO of Summit Carbon Solutions this week on AgriTalk. Interesting interview. What was your takeaway?
Well, number one, they're very hopeful that the approval from the Iowa Utilities Board is going to provide some of the momentum that the project needs. And the other thing is that in the conversation with CEO Lee Blank was that this is just the first step in Iowa. This is the base project that they got approval for. Now, after the Navigator system left its efforts and decided not to pursue a pipeline in the state, that meant that the Poet is looking for some of the lines to hook up to their plants and so on. So Summit has got to come back and look at some of these other areas that the pipe is going to have to run to if they are going to include a lot of the production that's in the state of Iowa. So that is happening. And the other thing that I think is really important is that I asked CEO Blank about the why. Why is this so important to get this pipeline done in the state of Iowa and what it might mean for the corn industry?
If we want to keep the ethanol industry competitive and we want to put it in a position where it can compete with other areas of the country that might be able to directly sequester, the 5-state region that we're working in needs the infrastructure project. And it's a large piece of the industry, Chip. So we want to make sure that we put the appropriate infrastructure in place so that the ethanol industry can continue to grow across the 5 states that we're working on and can compete specifically into the new markets that are now demonstrating real viability as we move forward.
Now, new markets, he's talking about the sustainable aviation fuels and renewable diesel, things like that. He's trying to say that this is going to be part of the carbon calculation, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's all part of the carbon intensity score. Right now, the way things stand with the Z45 credits or the 45Z credits that are going to be coming for the 2024-2025 crop, that will allow for a pathway for corn-based ethanol into that sustainable aviation fuel market. That's just part of the equation. What Lee Blank is saying, and the reason that they're putting this pipeline in, is they're just basically saying, listen, we don't have to worry about all of that. If we take the CO2 away from the ethanol production facilities and put it underground up in North Dakota, then all of that ethanol is going to qualify for the it will qualify for production of sustainable aviation fuel and some of the other low carbon fuels that are required out there, Clinton. So, but the bottom line here, dude, is there is a lot of work that needs to be done. It's not like the approval from the Iowa Utility Board all of the sudden means that Summit Carbon is going to be breaking ground on these pipelines in Iowa. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, there's a lot of work, and it just feels like they've got a lot of work to do to win over multiple states here to try to get landowners and farmers on board. I know that's part of the whole process here. Chip, as always, appreciate you being here. We'll be back with more U.S. We'll be back with more U.S. Farm Report to celebrate a big anniversary in North Dakota coming up next. Many small towns celebrate their heritage with a special festival or maybe other important sites throughout the town. New Salem, North Dakota is like those towns in some ways, but much unlike those towns when it comes to what they did to celebrate their history. The story is this edition of the American Countryside.
About 30 miles west of Bismarck, North Dakota, you'll find a town with quite an agricultural legacy.
New Salem was founded in the early 1880s. The Holsteins kind of came in around the turn of the century. Probably one of the leading dairy communities in North Dakota, it grew to be.
Alan Tellman has lived, farmed, and worked in and around New Salem for all of his life. His great-grandfather was one of those early settlers who began a dairy farm. As the years passed, people realized the consistent and profound difference the dairy farms in New Salem had on their town, and they wanted to do something to honor the work of present-day farmers and the generations before them.
Started out with a 8-foot statue on a corner someplace in town, and the more they talked about it, the bigger and bigger the project got. Finally, somebody in the Lions Club says, let's make something humongous that they can see from Interstate 94. So this is what they came up with.
Yes, since 1974, it's a 38-foot tall, 50-foot long cow named Salem Sioux, who literally stands overlooking the town and surrounding countryside.
At that time, the cost was a little over $40,000. In the 70s, $40,000 was a lot of money, So it was a big undertaking, it really was.
Salem Sioux is the world's largest cow, a sight that can be seen for miles in the distance. At the beginning of the 20th century, several area creameries were here to process the large amounts of milk produced by local farms. While times have changed, farming is still the foundation of the community.
Dairy industry obviously has shifted in the country. It's not like it used to be at all. But she still stands for a community. She stands for commitment, dedication. What it took on a dairy farm is what it takes to keep a community going also.
The Holsteins have long been the thing for which this county was known. The school's mascot is the Holstein, and although many of the real-life Holsteins have left area farms, the impact on the community remains. The town festival, Cowtown Hoedown, is held every July. Locals continue to maintain the driveway up School Hill, and they paint Sue every 6 to 8 years to keep her looking great. It's a place that thousands visit, and a place important to Alan.
When I think of my great-grandfather, like many of the farms here that settled here, and she's looking over the countryside, to me she means a lot. Yeah, it's part of my heritage, part of the town's heritage, and part of the present.
Salem Sioux has been standing watch over this hill now for over a half-century, a symbol of the dairy industry that was here and the farming that continues in the region. Traveling the countryside in New Salem, North Dakota, I'm Andrew McCrea.
Thanks, Andrew. Now this marks the 50th celebration for Sue as she was placed on top of the hill in 1974. Well, coming up, a new executive takes the wheel at John Deere. See who won that nationwide search for a chief tractor officer next. After a nationwide search, John Deere has announced its chief tractor officer. The winner will create content for the ag equipment maker's social media channels. And here's a look at his musical submission that might just create a new earworm.
Everybody knows about the yellow and green. It speaks of people and the places and about the machines. And it's a passion that is burned for 2 centuries. And I heard they're looking for a new CTO, and that's me, Rex Curtis. I'm young, funny, and handsome, a content creator. Social media's my grandson. Plus I am creative, I can sing and I can rap and I can tell you all the story, make a tractor out of wax.
As you heard, his name is Rex Curtis. John Deere says that as a recent graduate in environmental studies, Rex's knowledge and passion for the industry aligns well with the Chief Tractor Officer position. You'll remember we told you about the search for the job back in April, which was launched with help from quarterback Brock Purdy. Brock calling Rex to let him know that he had won. That video shared on TikTok.
Hey, it's Brock Purdy. We've been impressed with your skills and dedication. On behalf of John Deere, I'm thrilled to offer you the position of Chief Tractor Officer.
Thanks so much for the call, Brock. I won't let John Deere down.
The company says there were hundreds of applicants from 40 states, and officials say they were overwhelmed by the number of high-quality submissions received for the job. They say they look forward to having Rex on board for the 1-year contract position. Absolutely love it. From all of us here at U.S. Farm Report, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Tyne Morgan will be back in the saddle next week, where we'll continue to build on our tradition. Thanks for watching.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.